What's my favorite bike to look at, you ask? Let me show you. What a way to start a bike review, to talk about something subjective like looks. Normally I would completely agree, but we've had this Norco Fluid C1 perched up in the bike shop for a few months now, and people generally go out of their way to pass other comparable bikes to compliment how awesome this thing looks. It definitely has clean lines, but it has a paint job that is ridiculous. It is gloss black, it's got foil silver decals that really pop. It's got a metallic flake that normally looks silver, but when you get it in the sun, it's got sort of a chameleon effect, and it's just insane. And I don't know about you, but if I'm gonna spend thousands on a bike, I do wanna like the way that it looks, but I also want to love the way that it rides, and that's what we're here to shake down today. This is not gonna be my first ride. This thing's been away for most of the winter because of bad conditions, and so I'm gonna get back out on it, give it a shred, and give you guys my hot take on how it feels. If you're unfamiliar with the Norco Fluid, this is basically the carbon reincarnation of one of the most widely acclaimed and better reviewed aluminum bikes from last year, the Norco Fluid Aluminum. The carbon version of the Fluid actually has a carbon front triangle, which will save you a whopping 600 grams on the whole build. You can actually get into a carbon Fluid for around 4,100. This C1 kit is a GX Axis build kit. It is the flagship model, slots in at $6,000, or you can get a frame for $2,100. Now, the Fluid is a 130 travel bike paired with a 140 travel fork, so it should slide in on the lower end of the spectrum of that sort of do-it-all trail category, which is exactly why we're here at my local trails, because this thing to me epitomizes a sort of local trails bike. Let's go give it a rip.
It's a pretty intuitive manualer. Yeah. All right. Definitely feels about as natural as I'm gonna feel on a manual. I'm no savage at it. All right, a couple miles in. What I'll say out of the gate is the sizing of this bike feels super dialed. I am 5'9", just short of 5'10", and I slide in dead in a size large on the Norco size chart for this bike. Whoa. And this bike definitely has that smaller bike feel, definitely not a downcountry bike feel, which is like a lightning bolt, but it's quick.
So if you're familiar with PC Park, I'm here on one of our more tortuous climbs, Old 80 roadbed. This is a, you know, gears 1, 2, or 3 sort of grind. I'm running about 31% sag on the Fluid, and this thing has a surprisingly little amount of pedal bob. And yet, it still doesn't feel like the fastest bike I've ridden in recent times. It's certainly better than those bikes that you just sort of exist on your climbs. But again, I wouldn't give it lightning bolt status either. But either way, I would overall rate the Fluid as respectable plus on climbing. Whoa.
I'm alive. All right, this, if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know is a favorite section of mine of our local trails, Highroller Flow Trail. I'm gonna give you a very honest first pull on this bike. I don't even think this bike has ever been on this section. Right there, you can kind of see what I feel a little bit in the head tube angle. This thing actually stays more butt end heavy. For someone that's tired of getting bucked on jumps. This definitely has a more rearward bias, but not a bad first pull. Now I'll go back and trial it a couple times and give you a repeat when I feel a little more dialed. Big shout out to the SRAM transmission on this bike. I actually like it for going harder gears when accelerating. Got the jump line warmed up. I thought these berms would be more awkward with that taller stack height. It actually feels like I'm cornering this bike pretty well since that one's very deep. This bike has got some good pop to it. It actually feels as good as any bike I've taken through there in recent times. Still my favorite section of the trail. Ooh, good pop. This thing just was nice and progressive. Oh man, loving it. Those two tables back to back are actually hard to clear. This thing just got such good push. Watch out for the slime. Oh yeah, soaking that drop right up. Actually felt like I still had a ton of travel left. Definitely, if you're needing to hop, this thing will take you there. Actually really pleased with these Vittoria tires. I thought that I would be struggling with those things. The suspension tracks very well. It's not the most supple suspension I've ever felt, but I would describe it as very active. All right, we're gonna see how the fluid stays composed on something a little beefier. Ooh, nice. Not bad at all. So for climbing, the fluid has a very adequately steep seat tube angle. It keeps you much more forward and centered on the bike. Keeps you right over the bottom bracket so that you can, I think, more efficiently put down force into the cranks. And that's a newer mountain bike geometry trend that I really like and appreciate. All right, let's see what you got. Nice. Good traction right there in the suspension. Again, it's a pretty active rear suspension, which bodes well when you're pedaling through chunky sections and climbing. Sessioning into our beefiest trail, Sawmill. I would generally say that I felt a little underbiked on this. Ooh, feeling good. Feeling really good, actually. Got it! Woo! That actually felt easier on this bike than some of my bigger bikes. Such good progression. I didn't feel nearly as sketchy on it as I thought I was going to. Super cool.
All right, so here's the thing. Anytime I can go and have an absolute blast on a bike, it's easy for me to recommend that bike, and that's exactly what we've done today. It's the sort of ride where you just don't take yourself too seriously. You go and scout the jumps, you go and check out the features, and still get some miles in at the same time. That's exactly what I think the Norco Fluid does best. It is almost tiring in today's lineup of bike selection and trying to decide where you want to come in at. And if you are having trouble deciding, this is a bike that I think can take you to a lot of places. If you're wanting to pound mileage, this bike is going to do it. It is not the lightest, it is not the most efficient. Sliding in around 32 pounds, there are much lighter bikes to be had, but it is a respectable pedaler and you can definitely get your miles in with it. But then when you get to the features or the downhills that you want, it's got plenty of capability still packed in. Does it feel like a 150 travel sort of all mountain rig? Not really. You can definitely stretch its legs and find its limitations, but I was finding that that limitation was actually a lot deeper and a lot bigger than what I expected. I actually felt really good on the bigger jumps and some of the bigger drops that we have here locally. Let's talk about the high points or the positives of this bike. Obviously, we talked about the looks. I think it is absolutely dialed. But let's talk about this suspension kinematics. It is actually way more progressive than what I expected. It really pairs nicely to this actual higher volume RockShox air can. Helps it stay supple on the small bumps. It's definitely not the most supple rear end that I felt on a bike. It's edging toward, as I've mentioned, the more active side and the more supportive side, which is awesome if you love to rally some corners or some berms, and definitely there's loads of support in jump faces. For me, the Fluid is an absolutely superb jumper. I think that that may be actually what this bike does best. I also found myself pulling some pretty natural manuals. I'm definitely not the king of manuals, but I was getting some pretty good ones in, which to me just lends itself to the balance of the Fluid. So what are some negatives? Really not too many. I think that this is a very well-rounded bike that does a lot of things well. I guess if I were going to give it a negative, I would also say that it doesn't do anything insanely well. That doesn't mean that it's a bad pedaler, it's just not the best. It's not going to be the most downhill capable. Biggest knock that I have with this bike, especially if we're thinking about the stock build or really any of the other builds, is the fact that it comes with 175 millimeter cranks. I don't think that any bike in this category, maybe any mountain bike in 2024, should have 175 mil cranks. I was really surprised to see that. Although this does not have a particularly low bottom bracket, it's along with modern trends in that it's lower than they used to be. And so you're definitely gonna take some pedal strikes with 175s. That's actually a pretty short list of negatives because this thing overall is sweet. So who should consider this bike? Well, I think anyone that's looking for a frame only build. When you can grab this frame for $2,100 and other brands are approaching $4,000 in today's market, this is an obvious choice if you're not brand loyal to a different brand, but you're wanting a good all-arounder bike. I think that the Fluid, especially if you're wanting a carbon bike for almost half the cost of what other brands would cost, the Fluid should be a strong contender on your list. It's definitely no knock to other brands. Keep in mind, other brands' bikes in this genre are gonna have a carbon front and rear triangle, but you can literally save $1,500 to get this frame over those comparable brands. That's a set of carbon wheels, and I will argue that you will notice the weight savings in your carbon wheels more than you're gonna notice the weight savings in the frame. Or if you've got a budget of around $4,000, but you still want a carbon bike and you're gonna upgrade the components down the road, you can get one of these for just a hair over $4,000. And again, you can just update the components down the road. That would be a pretty cool option. So if you're looking for the every person's bike, check out the Norco Fluid C lineup. I've been digging it, had an absolute blast today. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. As always, thanks for watching.